Do you know of someone who ruined their life in just a matter of minutes? Story 1. Got drunk at the office holiday party, made out with my work wife, who also happened to be a subordinate. HR had a zero-tolerance policy and, shockingly, did not find it as hilarious as I did. Fired immediately. Came home to explain to my actual wife, who was equally unimpressed and filed for divorce on the spot. Then, to top it off, work wife was also married and decided to file for double divorce. Went from having a solid job and a stable marriage to living in a one-bedroom apartment Googling how to recover from a self-inflicted midlife crisis in a matter of days. Story 2. Back when I worked at a big accounting firm, the holiday parties were legendary. Open bar, insane bonuses, and at least one person getting fired the next day. But nothing topped the national team building event in Vero Beach. Someone got so wasted they decided to push a grand piano into the swimming pool. This led to immediate terminations and a very long company-wide email about appropriate conduct. I wasn't there, but the story was passed down like office folklore. Safe to say the parties got significantly less fun after that. Story 3. Guy I knew got kicked out of ROTC and moved back home. His dad ripped into him for being a lazy bum, so naturally he responded by robbing a bank, and he actually got away with it. But then he made the ultimate rookie mistake. He told someone. That person promptly turned him in. Turns out, when you commit armed robbery, they count every person in the bank as a victim. He got hit with so many charges he may as well have walked in with a neon sign saying, "Please lock me up forever." Story 4. A security guard at my old job took his role a little too seriously. He had a police scanner, wore tactical boots, and called himself a guardian of the premises. One day, a high-speed chase zipped by as he was getting off work. Instead of ignoring it like a normal person, he jumped into his personal car, sped ahead of the suspect, blocked them in, and pulled a gun. When the real cops showed up, they took one look at this unhinged wannabe cop, tackled him, and slapped him with felony charges. Last I heard, he was still trying to clear his name in a Facebook group for disgruntled security guards. Story 5. There was a guy in high school who thought he was going to put our dinky little private school on the map by making it to the NFL as a kicker. Then one night he decided to go pasture surfing, standing on a picnic table tied to the back of a truck while it sped through a field. One bad bump, and he went flying headfirst into the dirt. By the time I saw him a year later, he was learning how to feed himself again. His parents still kept his old football trophies on display, though. Story 6. Dude I worked with at Walmart stabbed his girlfriend when she told him she was pregnant. Nothing could have prepared me for seeing his mugshot on the news. It's insane how someone can go from guy I used to joke with in the break room to murderer in an instant. What's even worse is that homicide is the leading cause of death for pregnant women in the U.S. The whole thing still haunts me. Story 7. A guy I knew in high school thought he was being hilarious when he took a picture of a disabled WW2 gun during a school presentation and posted it on Snapchat with the caption, "Don't come to school tomorrow." No context, no joke, just instant life-ending consequences. He was suspended, lost his full-ride scholarship, and disappeared from our town. I always wondered what he told people when they asked why he wasn't in college. Oh, just made a casual terroristic threat online for some laughs. Story 8. My old roommate had everything going for him. A great job, nice house, even coached a youth sports team. Turns out he also had a very illegal hobby. He collected CP, photoshopping the faces of kids from his team onto them. Absolute nightmare fuel. He accidentally uploaded his collection to Adobe Cloud, and Adobe, being a responsible company, immediately alerted the feds. Last I checked, he was awaiting trial, but let's just say he's never coaching again. Sometimes technology being invasive is a good thing. Story 9. Dude at my old security company was way too into the job. He had ranks like we were in the military and carried a police scanner everywhere. One day, a high-speed chase blew past him. Instead of staying out of it like a normal person, he grabbed his gun, jumped in his personal car, cut off the suspect, and held him at gunpoint. Cops pulled up, saw an untrained off-duty security guard waving a gun around, and immediately arrested him. got hit with a bunch of felonies and lost everything. I'm sure he still tells people he was just trying to help. Story 10. Kid from my school wasn't going to graduate, so he decided to protest in the most reckless way possible, speeding and doing wheelies in front of the school to prove something. On his third lap, he clipped a truck, got launched onto the pavement, and snapped his neck. The school posthumously graduated him, which is just wild to me. Like, imagine walking across the stage and they're handing out diplomas and then, oh, here's one for the guy who wheelied his way into oblivion. Story 11. A friend of mine had a baseball scholarship lined up, full ride. One night he and his buddies were playing bottle rocket tag because apparently natural selection needed to do some work. One shot straight into his eye, blinding him permanently. No baseball, no scholarship, no career. Just like that, everything he'd worked for was gone over a dumb game that in hindsight was clearly a terrible idea. But hey, at least he's now an unintentional PSA for fireworks safety. Story 12. Guy at my old job had one job, don't be a dumbass. But one night he got blackout drunk, drove home, and hit a cyclist. Instead of stopping, he sped home, went to the neighbor's house, and told them he hit a pole. The cops weren't buying it, especially when they found his front bumper next to the guy's body. He got a slap-on-the-wrist sentence, served 6 months, and now spends his days on Facebook whining about how life is unfair. Buddy, you killed someone. Shut up. Story 13. Kid I knew in middle school was walking home, waiting for a train to pass. What he didn't realize was that he was standing on the tracks of a second oncoming train. Didn't hear it, didn't see it. That was the end of him. The worst part. This happened to 2 other people I've known. One guy got drunk, put on headphones, and decided to walk home along the tracks. Thought the train wasn't running that night, it was. Story 14. Some dude in my city tried to rob a bank in blackface to throw off the cops. Shockingly, it didn't work, because his disguise was absolute garbage. The cops arrested him in record time, like if there was a speedrun category for how fast can you get caught committing a felony, he'd hold the world record. I have no idea what kind of sentence he got, but whatever it was, he deserved at least another 5 years for sheer stupidity. Story 15. A gymnast climbed a pole to celebrate the Eagles' win, fell, cracked his skull, and died. Every time I see those videos of fans climbing things after a game, I remember that guy and wonder how many people have made the same mistake. You'd think natural selection wouldn't be a team sport, but here we are. Story 16. A guy I went to high school with had his whole life planned out. Full ROTC ride to college, officer track, everything. Then one night, his dad got on his case about being lazy. Instead of, proving him wrong, he decided to rob a bank. Got away with it. Moved out. Started living it up. Then in a move of absolute galaxy-brained stupidity, he bragged about it to a friend. That friend immediately turned him in. The cherry on top? Because he had a gun, they charged him for every person in the bank. Hope that flex was worth 30-plus years in prison. Story 17. My old neighbor got into a fight with his wife, so he and his buddy went out drinking to cool off. A few hours later, I woke up to my sister banging on my door. Somebody had crashed their car right in front of our house. I ran outside to see my neighbor and his friend trapped inside a car that was already on fire. It had hit a tree so hard the battery was in the street. We had to stand there and watch them burn to death. The worst part? His wife came running up, realizing what happened, and I, without thinking, just blurted out, "Some guy crashed his car." She figured it out a second later. I still replay that night in my head. Story 18. Guy I used to work with got caught selling fentanyl-laced pills. The first person he sold to died. He knew, and he still turned around and sold the same pills to someone else. That person died too. When the cops busted him, they had texts proving he was fully aware those pills were fatal. They hit him with everything. Life in prison, no parole. Could have stopped after the first one, could have walked away. Instead, he doubled down and threw his entire existence away. Story 19. A dude at my high school was convinced he was invincible. Would walk into traffic without looking, never got hit. Somehow survived an entire childhood of pure recklessness. Then he joined the army, did multiple tours, and came back still in one piece. I swear the laws of physics just didn't apply to him. Meanwhile, I stub my toe on a coffee table and feel like I need a will. Life is unfair. Story 20. Knew a guy in college, super fun, super outgoing. One night he got hammered, passed out, and his friends dragged him back to his dorm. The next morning, they found him dead, choked on his own vomit. It's terrifying how common that actually is. Another buddy of mine nearly did the same thing, but I happened to be awake and heard something weird. Turned him over just in time. He woke up the next day with zero memory of almost dying. Just sat there, hung over, wondering why his pillow was in the sink covered in puke. That night changed him, though. Cleaned up his act. Not everyone gets a second chance. Story 21. A co-worker of mine was a rising star in the company. Smart, hard-working, had a bright future. One night she got drunk at a party, took an Uber home. Responsible move, right? Except she left her keys inside. Instead of calling someone or waiting, she decided to climb up to her second-story balcony to get the spare. Slipped, paralyzed, couldn't work for a year, racked up medical debt, then got laid off when the pandemic hit. She did almost everything right, and still, one bad decision cost her everything. Story 22. A guy I went to high school with was dead set on impressing everyone. One day, he decides to slide down the middle of an escalator at a subway station. Lost his balance, fell 2 stories, and that was the end of him. I saw the whole thing, and to this day I still tense up when I see someone even lean against an escalator railing. If you're going to go out, at least let it be for something cooler than botched subway stunt. Story 23. My dad was dating this guy's ex-wife, and the dude hated him for it. One night, my dad left a bar, and the guy was waiting for him outside. A car pulled up, handed him a gun, and he walked right up to my dad, aimed at his head, and pulled the trigger. The gun jammed. My dad took off running, and the guy fired again, hitting him once in the back. Dad made it to the hospital, but lost a kidney. The guy only got 15 years for attempted murder. My dad survived that, but still ended up dying from COVID. Life is weird like that. Story 24. A guy I knew robbed a bank, got caught, made bail. So naturally, he immediately went back to the same bank and robbed it again. The second time, they didn't even have to investigate. They just waited for him to show up, like he had a reserved slot for dumbest criminal of the year. Judge threw the book at him, and I think he got something like 35 years. Story 25. A kid in my high school was obsessed with the idea of getting famous. He wasn't good at sports, music, or honestly anything, so he figured his best shot was pulling off a crazy stunt at a party. He climbed up to the second floor of a house, got ready to dive into the pool, and did not realize it was empty. You can guess how that ended. Went from chasing viral fame to a lifetime of needing a wheelchair in about 5 seconds. Story 26. My former roommate had everything. Great job, big house, solid future. The only problem? He was a raging alcoholic. He'd get off work at 2 p.m., hit the bar until 11, rinse, repeat. One night he got blackout drunk, hit a guy on a bike, and fled the scene. He stumbles home, tells the neighbor he hit a pole. The cops show up, find his front bumper next to the dead guy's body, and arrest him on the spot. Got sentenced to 10 years, but only had to serve 6 months. Now he's back home, jobless, posting Facebook rants about how life isn't fair. Buddy, you killed someone. Story 27. A local police chief in my town decided to pull a hit and run in his department vehicle on a parked car. If that's not bad enough, he did it after midnight and drove away. The investigation lasted about 3 seconds because, the vehicle literally had his name on it. By Tuesday, he was resigning. They didn't charge him with a DUI, but, there's only one reason you drive off after slamming into something at 2 a.m. Story 28. Back in high school, we had this insanely smart kid, full-ride scholarship to a top college. Then, during a WW2 presentation, a guy brought in some decommissioned guns to show the class. This dude takes a picture of one, posts it on Snapchat with the caption, "Don't come to school tomorrow." Zero context, just a lifetime of hard work gone in an instant. Suspended, lost his scholarship, and disappeared from town. I don't even know if he ever went to college after that. Story 29. A guy I worked with once thought he was a genius criminal mastermind. He robbed a bank with a simple note saying, "Put the money in the bag." Actually got away with it. Made bail a few weeks later. Then, because he had negative brain cells, he went back to the same bank and did it again. At that point, they were just waiting for him. Got tackled inside the bank and hit with 35 years. Imagine getting a second chance and blowing it immediately. Story 30. A kid in my town was protesting his school not letting him graduate by doing high-speed laps on his motorcycle out front, popping wheelies. On his third lap, he miscalculated, clipped a truck, and snapped his neck. The school posthumously gave him his diploma, which honestly felt like the worst participation trophy ever. Like, "Congrats, you won the stupidest way to graduate award." Story 31. A guy I knew in high school got drunk, got in his car with 5 friends, flipped it, and killed one of them. He went from being the funny, charming guy everyone liked to that guy, the one people whispered about in town. He couldn't handle it. A year later, he took his own life. The accident didn't just ruin one life. It took 2. Story 32. Dude I worked with once decided that robbing a bank wasn't dumb enough. So he put on blackface, thinking it'd throw the cops off. Spoiler, it didn't. They caught him so fast it was honestly impressive. If they gave out prison time based on stupidity, he'd never be getting out. Story 33. My dad used to work for a company that rented houses. One day he went to check on a tenant who was late on rent. The guy panicked and killed him. Just like that. My dad was in his 80s just trying to get some extra cash, and this guy, who had no record, just snapped. One bad decision ruined multiple lives in under a minute. Story 34. A guy I knew was on track to be a sergeant major in the Army, had everything going for him. Came back from Iraq, went out drinking, and decided to drive home. Crashed into a tree. His passenger? Another soldier. Lost an eye, most of his face, and his ability to speak properly. One night, one stupid decision, and that dude's entire career and someone else's life was over. Story 35. Guy at my high school was obsessed with impressing people. At a party, he climbed onto a picnic table tied to the back of a pickup truck, aka pasture surfing. One bad bump and he went flying, hit his head, went into a coma, and never fully recovered. By the time I saw him again a year later, he could almost feed himself. Hell of a price to pay for 5 seconds of showing off. Story 36. There was a guy who was absolutely going to the NFL as a kicker. He was that good. Then, one night, he and his friends thought it'd be funny to play bottle rocket tag. One shot straight into his eye, blinded permanently. No more football, no more scholarship, no more career. Just a lifetime of explaining how he lost his future to fireworks. Story 37. Kid I knew in middle school was waiting for a train to pass but was standing on another set of tracks. Didn't see or hear the other train coming. He was gone in an instant. It's one of those things where you think, that has to be rare, but I swear I've heard multiple stories just like it. Story 38. A gymnast in my city climbed a street pole after the Eagles won a game. Lost his balance, cracked his skull, and died. Every time I see drunk sports fans climbing on traffic lights, I wonder if they even realize how many people have done exactly that and never got back up. Story 39. My ex-girlfriend went out with some friends one night. When they left, she offered to drive someone else's car, just for fun. What she didn't see was a kid in a Mustang coming over a hill at 100 miles per hour because someone had passed him earlier and bruised his ego. The crash killed her instantly. The guy who did it? He was 17 and only got 4 years in prison for ending 2 lives. Story 40. A dude I knew got blackout drunk, climbed onto a railing at a frat party and tried to sit down. Instead, he lost his balance, fell backward off the deck, and landed head first. Medevac to the hospital. Didn't make it through the night. And the worst part? People assumed he was just some reckless idiot doing a dumb stunt. He wasn't. He just made one small mistake and paid the ultimate price. Story 41. Had a buddy who always drank way too much. One night he passed out in his dorm room, and we all just thought he'd sleep it off. The next morning he was dead, choked on his own vomit. To this day, I still get paranoid when I see someone passed out drunk. I've turned so many people onto their sides because of that. I'd rather them be mad at me than end up in a body bag. Story 42. A guy I used to work with stole plastic explosives from a Marine base and tried to sell them at a bar that was literally in sight of the base. The first person to show interest? An NCIS agent. That man went from thinking he was a criminal mastermind to serving hard time in about 5 minutes. Probably the shortest NCIS episode ever. Story 43. A woman I knew sold fentanyl-laced pills. The first person she sold to died. She knew they were bad and she still sold them to someone else. That person died too. The cops got her texts proving she knew what she was doing. Life in prison. No parole, some crimes you don't come back from. Story 44. A 17-year-old girl was doing 105 miles per hour on a dark road at 6 a.m. Hit a guy head-on. She died instantly. He lost his teeth, but he lived. Now, every day, he drives past her memorial on the side of the road and thinks about how one dumb decision ended her entire life. Story 45. A guy I used to know was on the fast track to a great military career. Smart, disciplined, respected. Then, in basic training, he decided to pick a fight. Some stupid alpha male pecking order nonsense. The other guy slammed his head into the corner of a wall locker, hard enough to break through his temple. He spent months in the hospital and was never the same. Went from a guy with a bright future to someone who needed help tying his own shoes. All because he couldn't let a petty insult go. Story 46. My dad was an addict. Pills were his thing. He'd take them, pass out, wake up, forget he took them, and take them again. One day he didn't wake up. That was it. Just like that, his life was over. I don't know if it was an accident or if part of him just didn't care anymore. Either way, it was a slow-motion train wreck that ended exactly how everyone expected. Story 47. A guy I went to school with had his whole life lined up until he got caught in the deep web buying CP. He wasn't just collecting either. He was photoshopping the faces of kids he coached onto images. Sickening. He thought he was being smart by keeping it offline, but he accidentally uploaded some of it to Adobe Cloud. Adobe wasted no time calling the feds. Now, instead of being a respected coach, he's a soon-to-be convict. Good riddance. Story 48. A high school friend of mine was messing around with fireworks. Bottle rocket tag. Because, why wouldn't you aim mini explosives at your friends? He took one straight to the eye. Lost his vision permanently. He was supposed to go to college on a baseball scholarship. That ended the second that rocket hit. People don't realize how fast your life can change. Story 49. Had a buddy who thought he could handle his alcohol. We were out drinking one night and I was already winding down, but he was going hard. We crashed at my place, and in the middle of the night I heard this weird noise. Couldn't figure it out at first, but something felt off. I rolled over, flashed my phone light, and saw him choking on his own vomit. If I hadn't woken up, he'd be dead. He had no memory of it the next morning, just found his pillow in the sink and asked what happened. I told him. He got real quiet after that. Story 50. A dude I knew got super drunk at a party and passed out. Friends carried him home, tucked him in, and assumed he'd be fine. Next morning, they found him dead. He had choked in his sleep and no one noticed. That moment really stuck with me. Now, anytime someone drinks too much, I make sure they're on their side. I don't care if they call me annoying. I'd rather that than go to their funeral. Story 51. A guy I worked with thought it'd be funny to rob a bank in blackface. His logic? The cops would look for a black suspect. His execution? Absolute garbage. He got caught so fast it was honestly impressive. Like, I think they arrested him before he even made it home. If stupidity was a felony, he'd be serving consecutive life sentences. Story 52. There was a dude in my town who got into an argument with his wife, stormed out, picked up his buddy, and went drinking to cool off. A few hours later, I was woken up by my sister freaking out. Someone had crashed outside our house. I ran outside and saw the car on fire, 2 guys trapped inside. The impact had been so bad their car battery was in the street. We watched them burn. The worst part? The wife came running up, realized it was her husband's car, and I, completely in shock, just blurted out, Some guy crashed. I still feel sick about it. Story 53. A security guard at my old job was way too into being a protector of the premises. He had a police scanner, wore tactical boots, the whole deal. One day, a high-speed chase flew by him. Instead of not getting involved, he jumped in his personal car, sped ahead of the suspect, blocked them in, and pulled a gun. The cop showed up, saw an unhinged guy with a gun, and tackled him instead, charged him with a bunch of felonies, and that was the end of his career. Maybe if security companies stopped giving out fake military ranks, we wouldn't have these mall cop goes rogue disasters. Story 54. A guy I knew had a bright future. Was going places. Then he got caught selling fentanyl-laced pills. The first person he sold to died. He knew it was bad and he still sold to someone else. That person died too. The text between him and his dealer sealed his fate. Life in prison, no parole, one choice, and that was it. His life, over. Story 55. There was a guy in my town who thought he'd get his name in the history books by going to the NFL as a kicker. Then one night, he went pasture surfing, standing on a picnic table tied to the back of a pickup truck. One bad bump, and he went flying. By the time I saw him a year later, he could almost feed himself again. So yeah, he made history, just not the kind he wanted. Story 56. A friend of mine had a cousin who was a total adrenaline junkie, would do all kinds of dumb stunts. One night he climbed up onto a second-story deck railing at a party. No reason, just drunk confidence. Lost his balance, fell backwards, landed on his head. Didn't make it. And the worst part? People assumed he was being some reckless idiot. He really wasn't. He just miscalculated. And that was it. Story 57. A gymnast in my city climbed a traffic pole after the Eagles won, fell, hit his head, and died. I think about that every time I see drunk fans climbing things after a game. People forget how fast things can go sideways. Story 58. Guy in my high school never looked before crossing the street. Ever. Just walked right into traffic. It became a running joke. Cars swerving, people honking. He never got hit. Then he joined the army, did a few tours, came back still in one piece. Meanwhile, I sneeze too hard and pull a muscle. Life's weird. Story 59. A 17-year-old girl in my town was driving 105 miles per hour on a dark road at 6 a.m. She hit a guy head-on. She died instantly. He lost his teeth, but he lived. Every day he drives past her roadside memorial, thinking about how one stupid decision erased her entire future. Story 60. A former coworker of mine got drunk at a company party, left his keys inside, and decided to climb up to his second-story balcony to get his spare. Slipped. Paralyzed himself. Couldn't work for a year. Medical debt ruined him. And when the pandemic hit, he was laid off. He did almost everything right. Took an Uber home. Wasn't reckless. Just one bad decision. And his life was never the same. Story 61. A dude I knew was so deep into debt, he panicked when his landlord came knocking. Instead of, explaining, he killed the guy. An old man just doing his job. One moment of panic and that was it. He's in prison for life now, and for what? Rent money? Some people don't think at all before they act.